I used to believe that at 44 life no longer held surprises. Every morning started the same one lukewarm cup of coffee, the same news program crackling from my old radio, and a quiet sigh as I looked out the window at a world that kept turning without me feeling like I belonged to it. Since my divorce 7 years ago, I wouldn't say I was unhappy. I still worked, had friends traveled when I could. But somewhere in the middle of all that, there was an emptiness I no longer had the courage to name. The small house at the end of my street was just quiet enough. Most of my neighbors were older and no one particularly close except Max, the scruffy dog, who stuck his nose through the fence every morning to lick my hand. Max belonged to Daniel, the man who lived across the street. In his early 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, quiet. He moved through life like a shadow. We exchanged nothing more than polite greetings. Good morning, or nice weather today. Nothing more. He seemed like the kind of man who kept his world private. I was the same, until one late autumn afternoon when the sun sank behind the rooftops and poured golden light through every window pane. I had just gotten home from a long day, body drained, spirit frayed. As I slid the key into my front door, I noticed the porch light flickering again. I sighed. That was the 3rd time this month. I thought about ignoring it the way I ignored all the small things I didn't have the energy to care about anymore. Looks like you could use a hand. I jumped. The warm, low voice came from beyond the fence. It was Daniel, hands in his coat pockets, salt and pepper hair tousled by the breeze. Max lay calmly at his feet. I gave a sheepish smile. I probably should have changed it last week, but... He stepped closer. If you don't mind, I can take a look. I work in construction. I should have declined. I was used to doing things on my own. But something in his eyes, neither pushy nor pitying, just steady, made me nod. Daniel pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket. He worked in silence with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I stood nearby, holding my lukewarm coffee, watching him. I didn't know why I felt so at peace over something as simple as a light bulb. All done, he said. Loose connection. The bulb's fine. I flipped the switch. A warm yellow glow filled the porch, and for some reason, my eyes stung. Daniel leaned against the railing, looking up at the dusk. When I first moved here, I thought this place would just be a stopover. But then, I never left. I turned to him. Why not? He looked at me. Some places, even if they're quiet, have a stillness that heals you. And some people, even if they only say hello in the morning, make you feel like you're not entirely alone. I didn't know what to say. But for the first time in years, someone's words reached me, not loudly, but deeply. That night, I left the porch light on longer than usual. Not because I feared the dark, but because something inside me felt lit in a new way. A quiet presence that didn't press on old wounds, but gently soothed them. If you've ever thought that all life's wonders end after 30, Life Whispers has another story for you. Follow the channel because sometimes the thing that changes everything begins with a simple nod beneath a flickering porch light. There are truths that only reveal themselves when we are willing to sit still and be silent long enough. The world today urges us to speak more, do more, be everywhere, have opinions about everything. But those with true inner strength choose a different path. They choose to step back, to observe instead of argue, to stay quiet, not just to hear others, but to finally hear themselves. Because in silence, the mind begins to speak. In that stillness, you begin to see your tangled thoughts, your automatic reactions, the unconscious behaviors driven by ego, the times you spoke without thinking, acted without understanding. And only in silence can you detach from those unconscious patterns and reclaim authorship over your life. Silence is a mirror for the ego. No spotlight, no applause, no praise. Just you and the raw, shaky, empty version of yourself. Most people fear silence because it exposes the emptiness within. But the strong, they face it. They enter it. They stay in it until they overcome themselves. In silence, everything becomes clearer. The sages of history, Socrates, Confucius the Buddha, all taught that stillness is the foundation of wisdom. The wiser a person is, the less they speak. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they only speak when necessary. And every word becomes a precise, deliberate, and meaningful blade. Look at any master in any field, the swordsmith hammering steel, the musician refining every note, the coder immersed in lines of logic. What do they all have in common? They work in silence. They don't shout. They don't boast. They don't need applause. They need stillness to concentrate, to refine, to sharpen themselves. And in that process, wisdom is honed. The ego is worn down. There's no space for ego when you're truly learning something. No room for pride when you're still fixing errors, starting over, training again. Only humility, and that humility is the key that unlocks wisdom. When you stay in silence long enough, you stop needing praise. You stop needing validation. You only need to see your own path clearly. You stop asking, "What do others think of me?" and start asking, "Am I living true to what I value?" In silence, you no longer react. You begin to choose. You choose your words. You choose your actions. You choose where your attention goes. And that ability to choose consciously and clearly is the true mark of wisdom. If this message resonates with the journey you're on, hit subscribe to the Wisdom Refinery channel, because every day we bring you lessons just like this to help you build inner strength, master your thinking, and upgrade your life from within. Some evenings aren't meant to become memories, yet somehow they do. They arrive quietly, without warning, needing nothing more than a knock on the door and someone willing to step inside. That night was one of them. Daniel showed up with a bag of fresh-baked pastries and a few sprigs of rosemary. "I had extra," he said with a soft smile. "Saw your porch light was on, thought maybe you'd want to share a little." I invited him in without hesitation. The small kitchen was already filled with the scent of dried orange peel and cinnamon tea. The dining table only had 2 chairs, but that night it felt full with warmth. We talked about simple things: the maple tree in front of the house, the leaf-filled streets at the edge of the season, the faint jazz playing from the old radio on the shelf. Then I told him about my work editing manuscripts and one particular female character that had haunted me for a week. "She reminds me too much of myself," I said. Daniel listened with care, like every word mattered. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He simply stayed with presence. When the tea was halfway cold, he told me about his father, a carpenter, about the first time he used a saw and ruined an entire tabletop. "My dad didn't yell," he said. "He just looked at me and said, 'This boy will learn how to fix things because he already tried to build with his whole heart.'" I don't know when exactly my eyes began to blur. Maybe it was when he spoke about losing his mother at 25 and how it felt like someone had sliced off a whole piece of his memory. I reached out and touched his hand gently. "I know that feeling," I whispered, "too well." In that moment, neither of us smiled. Neither looked away. We just sat there, like 2 people who'd been lost in a city too crowded for too long, and had finally found their way to each other. As Daniel stood to leave, he paused and asked, "Will you be having tea tomorrow?" I nodded. He smiled. "I'll bring honey. For the heart." That night, I curled up under the covers, still cradling my cup of tea, now cold, feeling something in me slowly warming again. Not because of anything grand, but simply because someone had listened with their whole heart. If someone has ever made you want to brew one more cup of tea just to have them stay a little longer, then you understand the kind of stories Life Whispers wants to tell. Subscribe to our channel because sometimes love doesn't come in lightning strikes. It comes in the soft sound of two teacups meeting in a quiet kitchen late at night. There are silences that don't need to be filled. They linger like a thin veil of morning mist over the grass, gentle cold, but not frightening. Silence between two people is often the punctuation mark at the end of connection. But between Daniel and me, silence became a new kind of language, a quiet tether that somehow ran deeper than all polite conversation. Since that evening over tea, our moments together began to unfold with an almost inexplicable ease. No plans, no invitations. One day, while I was pruning the plants by the porch, Daniel brought over a handful of wooden scraps he had just carved. He said I might use them to fix a bookshelf. Another time, I was making candied orange peel, and he knocked to borrow a glass jar. And just like that, neither of us remembered who started the exchange. We only knew we both quietly hoped it would continue. I began noticing things I hadn't before, like how Daniel had a habit of smiling softly when Max curled up in the sun, how he stood still at his kitchen window every Sunday morning, as if waiting for someone, how the steady rhythm of his saw echoed faintly from his garage every Friday evening, like a lullaby from a grown man who had learned to soothe himself through solitude. One evening, after watering my plants, I noticed his porch light was out. I brought over a new bulb. When he opened the door, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then softness. "Need a hand?" I smiled, holding up the bulb. He didn't speak, just tilted his head slightly and stepped aside. As I stood on the small stool he'd pulled over, fingers brushing the ceiling, I heard his voice below, low, warm. "This is the first time someone's changed a light bulb for me." I looked down at him. Our eyes met, longer than a blink, shorter than a breath. Then I turned, fitted the bulb, my hands slightly trembling, not from the height. When the light came on, I stepped down and brushed the dust from my sleeves. Daniel handed me a glass of orange juice, like everything that had just happened was entirely ordinary. We sat on his porch. Max curled at our feet. The soft yellow light caught the silver strands at Daniel's temples. I asked about his mother, the woman he had once only mentioned in passing over tea. This time, he spoke more of the first time she taught him how to bake, of how she framed his childish scribbles like masterpieces, of how she always said, "Nothing is ever small if it's done with your whole heart." I didn't interrupt, not because I didn't know what to say, but because some memories aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be remembered so that no part of us is lost to time. Before I left that night, I asked, "Do you write?" He looked surprised. "Write what? Just... I feel like some stories shouldn't be told only once." He studied me for a while, then nodded gently. "I'll try, but I think I'll need someone to remind me when I want to quit." I smiled. "Then write whenever my porch light is on. That'll be the signal." And from the next night on, the light stayed on. Some feelings don't need a name, don't need a definition. They grow from the smallest gestures, a light bulb, a glass of juice, the faint sound of sawing in the distance. And if you've ever known a bond like that, Life Whispers is here to carry the story forward with you. Let us remind you, quiet things can speak the loudest. Winter arrived slowly, slipping into every corner of the porch, every vein of fading leaves. On a moonless night, I heard a gentle knock on the wooden fence. When I stepped outside, Daniel stood there holding a small lavender pot. Soil clung to his fingers. "I was trimming some plants," he said. "Thought of you. You once mentioned you liked the scent." I invited him to the backyard. By the maple tree, I had set up a small wooden table, 2 chairs, and a paper lantern casting a soft glow. I didn't know why I had prepared it, only that I had felt the need. Maybe the heart always knows the reason before we do. We sat there side by side, in a quiet garden that seemed to hold all the things we hadn't yet said aloud. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook, the one he had started writing in after that night we spoke about his mother. He read a few entries, not polished, not poetic, just honest thoughts about life, about missing someone, and about quiet loneliness. "Do you think we only begin to really live?" he asked softly, "when we admit we're lonely?" I nodded, my throat tightening. I had lived like that too, passing people like shadows, too afraid to say I'm tired. I need someone, and tonight I didn't want that silence to happen again. So we talked about the pain we had carried, about the days that still clung to our chests like thorns. And somehow, as we shared, they stopped hurting. We laughed, we cried, and both of us were surprised by how light we suddenly felt. Daniel took my hand for the first time. No rush, no trembling, just a gentle hold, like saying, "I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." When the night grew late, I walked him to the gate. We said nothing, but we both understood. Some truths don't need words. Some connections bloom quietly, like lavender under moonless skies, tended by 2 people brave enough to stop pretending they were fine. If this chapter moved something in you, follow Life Whispers. Because sometimes the most meaningful conversations don't start with a declaration, they begin with a knock on a fence and a lavender pot in someone's hand. That morning, the air was crisp. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, weaving through the quiet corners of my little house. I sat by the window, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, cradling a warm cup of tea in my hands, a familiar routine, old but never failing to bring me peace. Then the doorbell rang. Not urgently, not insistently, just gently. When I opened the door, there stood Daniel holding a box of waffles still steaming in the cool air. "I woke up early and made a whole batch," he said, half joking, his eyes soft. I'm not sure if it was out of habit or because of someone, but if you haven't had breakfast. I smiled and stepped aside. We sat out on the small balcony where the first light of the day slipped through the bare branches. Each bite of waffle was crisp, comforting. Each sip of tea warmed me in a way that reached deeper than the body. And then, between the birdsong and the soft trace of cinnamon, Daniel asked a question that made me pause. "Have you ever thought about starting over? Not just love, but living differently?" I looked at him, and I realized he wasn't asking for an answer. He was opening a door, one I hadn't touched in years. I remembered old dreams. In my younger days, I once dreamed of opening a small bookshop with large glass windows facing the street, where people could sip tea while reading. But life pulled me along, one thing after another, until that dream folded into the pages of a life that never got read aloud. I used to dream of building a cabin by a stream, Daniel said softly. Now I just build homes for other people. We looked at each other, and something settled in the quiet between us. Not quite love, but something rarer, understanding. 2 people once broken, slowly sitting together to piece something back again. Daniel handed me a tissue gently. I wasn't crying, but he knew some tears never fall from the eyes. When breakfast ended, he pulled out a small folded paper from his coat pocket. It was a sketch of a cabin by the stream, rough lines, raw emotion. "I drew this 10 years ago," he said, "but today I think it belongs with you." maybe we both need a reason to build something." I didn't say anything. I simply tucked the drawing into my notebook like someone saving a rare seed, not sure when they'll plant it, only knowing they will. If you've ever kept a dream folded away for too long, Life Whispers is here to remind you it's never too late to dust it off, to start again, to dream again together. That afternoon, a soft rain began to fall. The drops landed in steady rhythm on the rooftop, and the whole house seemed to melt into a wordless song. I was reading when I heard a knock at the door, not hurried, not hesitant, just a slow, familiar rhythm, like someone who knew they'd be welcomed. It was Daniel. He stood there, holding an old vinyl record and a small portable player. "I found this while cleaning out the shed," he said. "Thought you might like it." I took it surprised. It was a classical piece I'd mentioned only once weeks ago, over tea. Not because it was well known, but because I used to listen to it with my mother, who had passed away many years before. We sat in the living room as the record began to spin. The sound cracked slightly, imperfect, but somehow made the memory sharper. I closed my eyes, and just like that, I was back in childhood, Mom cleaning the house, humming along softly to the piano. Daniel said nothing. He just sat nearby quietly. His silence didn't make the room feel empty. It filled the space, filling in the gaps left by long winters and quiet nights with no one waiting. When the music ended, I turned to him. "How did you remember this?" He shrugged, smiling gently. "Because when you talked about it, your eyes weren't here. I figured it must have meant something." I didn't know how to respond, but I felt something soften inside me. Some people don't ask too many questions. They just notice. They sit beside you patiently until you're ready to speak, if ever. Rain continued to fall. Daniel told me about his own mother, a woman who loved poetry and planted wild daisies. She used to say, he shared, "Happiness is when one person knows how to stay silent at the right time, and another knows how to sit beside them without needing words." I laughed a real laugh, the first in a long while. Maybe every piece of music needs its pauses so the next notes can rise clearly. And maybe I needed Daniel not to fix anything, but to be the quiet space where my heart could breathe between the chords of life's melody. The rain lingered for days afterward, as if autumn itself didn't want to leave. I stood on the porch, an old umbrella in hand, eyes watching the leaf-covered road. Just then, Daniel appeared across the street, holding a deep burgundy umbrella, the large one, with a polished wooden handle I'd seen him carry a few times last rainy season. "Are you free tomorrow morning?" he asked as he approached, his voice calm and steady, cutting gently through the patter of rain on the tin roof. I tilted my head, surprised. "Is something wrong?" He smiled, a quiet, thoughtful smile, as if holding back a promise not yet spoken aloud. "I want to take you somewhere, a place that helped me find my balance again after a rough time. Maybe it might give you something too." I hesitated briefly, then nodded. Not because I was curious, but because of the way he spoke, unhurried, unpressured, but with a sincerity that was hard to ignore. The next morning, we drove toward the foothills to an old shrine nestled within a pine forest. The road was damp, but peaceful, with only the sound of wind weaving through branches and the scent of wet earth mingling with fresh grass after rain. When we arrived, Daniel didn't head straight in. Instead, he stopped at a small wooden bridge and turned to me. He held out the burgundy umbrella, the one from yesterday. "This is yours," he said. "I've kept it for 2 years now. You left it at the bus stop near home. I figured it was time I returned it." I froze. This umbrella, I thought it was long lost. It was a gift from my mother when I left for college. My fingers tightened around the handle, and my heart sank, soft aching. Daniel told me he had always meant to give it back, but never knew how to begin. Until one day, he realized sometimes people just need time and a strong enough reason to knock on someone's door. We walked into the shrine. Wind stirred the paper chimes along the eaves, releasing delicate sounds like the sighs of memory. Daniel pointed to a stone wall etched with old wishes. Everyone who comes here leaves behind something they've never told anyone, he said. I looked at him, a tide of emotions rising within. Maybe the things left unsaid lived inside me too, about nameless loneliness, folded away dreams, and a heart that had been quietly searching for a place to rest. Before we left, Daniel pulled out a small piece of paper. He wrote something, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a crevice in the stone wall like so many others had done. I didn't ask what he wrote, but when it was my turn, I tore a page from my notebook and scribbled, "If someone is patient enough to walk beside you through the rain, maybe it's time to believe in sunshine again." We drove home in silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that says everything has already been understood. Because sometimes an umbrella isn't just a memory. It's a promise that next time it rains, I won't be walking alone. That afternoon, the sky seemed dipped in golden honey, rich and quiet, pouring across rooftops, trees, and even into the hesitant corners of my gaze. It was the kind of day that appeared uneventful until fate gently knocked without warning. Daniel sent a simple message. "If you're free at sunset, meet me in the backyard." No explanation, no flourish. But somehow, it was enough to send my heart slightly off balance. I changed into a mist-gray knit dress, draped an old silk scarf around my shoulders, the kind I used to wear when life still held daydreams, though I hadn't touched it in years. Stepping into the garden, I saw Daniel spreading out a small blanket on the grass near the fading lavender bush. A woven basket, 2 ceramic cups, a glass teapot filled with orange peel and ginger tea. Everything so thoughtful, it felt like the work of someone who knew me better than I knew myself. "I wasn't sure if you liked tea in the afternoon," he said as I sat down, "but I had a feeling. Today, tea might say more than we can." I smiled, taking the cup. The warmth and citrus scent curled into my chest like a quiet whisper. We didn't begin with anything grand, just little stories. Daniel talked about his first autumn here, the leaves that surprised him, about the time he forgot to turn off the garden hose and turned his yard into a mini lake. Our laughter was soft and real, melting away the invisible space between 2 rooftops. And then as the light dipped low, Daniel opened a small box from the basket. Not a gift, not a dramatic gesture, just a book. The Little Prince worn spine pages underlined in violet ink. He placed it in my hands like it might break. "I first read it when I was 17, he said quietly. And I still think about this line. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I ran my hand along the cover as if touching a part of the past, and somehow also the future waiting patiently just beyond the next chapter. "Claire," Daniel said, his voice soft but steady like wind across open fields, "do you ever think we all live according to a script so tightly that we forget how to listen to our hearts?" I looked at him. His eyes weren't asking for answers, only for presence. "Yes," I whispered, "but today, I think I folded that script away." A breeze passed through, carrying the scent of tea and wild grass. The sun sank gently behind the trees, leaving a wash of soft orange-pink across the sky. We sat side by side, no promises, no definitions, but it was a real date. A rendezvous my heart had longed for without knowing what to call it. As twilight deepened and night brushed the edges of the lawn, I turned to him, and exhaled a breath that felt like shedding the old armor I'd worn for too many years. "I think I'm ready," I said, not sure if I meant one thing or everything. Daniel didn't ask ready for what. He just nodded. I woke up the next morning to soft sunlight pouring through the wooden window frame, now weathered with time. Birds chirped outside, and the wind gently rustled the trees near the porch. Somewhere deep inside me, a quiet whisper rose. Yesterday wasn't a dream. The small silver bracelet with the key charm, Daniel's gift, was still lying on the table next to a cup of tea faintly scented with cinnamon. I smiled to myself. A smile that didn't need to be seen because it came from the quietest, deepest part of me, a place I thought had long been sealed, now slowly opening again. Daniel arrived at 9 a.m., no knocking, just a gentle nod as I opened the door, his hand holding a bouquet of wild daisies. "For you," he said, "to mark the beginning of a new season." We didn't go far, just wandered around the little garden behind the house, picking up the last golden leaves clinging to the ground, sharing memories we thought we had long forgotten. Every step, every quiet laugh felt like we were rewriting the manuscript of a life we once believed was too late to revise. Daniel looked at me, never rushing. "I won't promise I'll never make you sad," he said softly. "But I do promise I'll be here to walk with you through the quiet notes of life." I didn't answer with words. I just reached for his hand and held it for a very long time. Senior Love Stories continues not through dramatic moments or grand declarations, but through days like these. A nod in the morning, a warm cup of tea in the afternoon, a glance that says everything without saying a word. If you've been waiting for a sign to open your heart again, maybe this is it. Subscribe to Senior Love Stories, where we listen, we remember, and we continue writing the kind of love stories that aren't loud, but still stop your heart for a moment. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures, but in a neighbor's quiet presence and a tiny silver key. Life whispers, where hearts that once walked alone find each other again.